I was 17 when I first found out that the college fund my grandparents had set up for me even existed. My mom let it slip one night at dinner, when she and my dad were bickering over finances again, something they did like it was a hobby. Well, thank goodness Craig has that college fund from your parents, or we'd really be in trouble, she muttered between bites of pasta. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I remember looking up at her and asking, "Wait, what college fund?" She blinked like she'd forgotten I was even there. That was the first time I learned I had $40,000 sitting in a bank account somewhere, thanks to my grandparents, my dad's parents, who had passed away when I was in middle school. They weren't rich, but they were responsible. They lived modestly and saved what they could. Apparently, after they died, they left a chunk of their savings specifically for me, meant to help with college. Not for the family, not for emergencies, not for anything else. Just me, my future, my education, my shot at getting out of the house and doing something different with my life. I was stunned, grateful, of course, but also confused why no one had told me. My mom just shrugged and said something like, "We didn't want you to get cocky or start slacking off in school just because you had money waiting." That didn't sit right, but I was a teenager who hadn't even applied to colleges yet, so I let it go. I didn't press the issue. I should have. My name's Craig. I'm 32 now, and this story still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. Back then, we lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. My parents weren't terrible people, not at first glance anyway. They worked hard. My dad was a postal worker, and my mom was a part-time dental receptionist. We weren't well off, but we got by. I did chores, kept my grades up, stayed out of trouble. I wasn't the golden child, though, not by a long shot. That title belonged to my older sister, Melissa. Melissa is 4 years older than me and has always been the center of the universe in my parents' eyes. She was bubbly and fun and had big dreams. I was quiet, bookish, and, apparently, too serious for my own good. Melissa didn't finish college, but it was never treated like a failure. She bounced around from job to job, boutique retail, yoga instructor training, photography school for 6 months. My parents called it exploring her path. Meanwhile, I worked 2 part-time jobs during my last year of high school just to save money for textbooks, because I didn't want to touch that college fund until I really needed it. I guess I had this naive idea that if I worked hard and planned well, things would work out. When Melissa got engaged at 25, the house turned into a wedding war room overnight. Color swatches, cake tastings, venue tours. It was like a second full-time job for my mom. My dad didn't say much, but I could see the stress creeping into his face. Melissa wanted a dream wedding, and she meant it. She found a historic estate outside the city with a marble staircase and a horse-drawn carriage package. The rental alone was more than most people's cars. I remember joking, "Unless you're marrying a prince, I don't know how anyone pays for that." No one laughed. My mom actually shushed me. I was 19 at the time, home from my first year of college. I'd chosen a local state university and commuted from home to save money. Every time I saw Melissa's wedding plans sprawled across the kitchen table, I felt a weird mix of awe and dread. There was no way my parents could afford any of it. They were already stretched thin. I figured maybe Melissa's fiancé's family was loaded. I never asked, and no one volunteered the information. Then, one day, about a month before the wedding, I overheard something that made my chest go cold. I'd come downstairs late at night for a glass of water, and my parents were talking in hushed voices at the kitchen table. My mom said, "Well, once we use the rest of Craig's college fund, we'll be okay. I'll just have to put off the dental work another year." My dad muttered something about credit cards and refinancing. I stood there in the dark, frozen. I didn't make a sound. I just turned and went back upstairs, heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next night either. My head was spinning. I wanted to believe I'd misheard. I wanted to believe they'd never do that to me. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They'd drained my fund. The money my grandparents had set aside for my future, gone, swallowed up by flowers and catering and silk chair covers for a wedding that wasn't even mine. And the worst part? They hadn't even told me. They weren't going to. I confronted them 2 days later. I waited until breakfast when Melissa wasn't around. I was shaking as I asked, "Did you spend my college fund on the wedding?" My mom froze mid-sip of coffee. My dad looked at the wall like he wanted to disappear. They didn't deny it. My mom launched into a speech about how Melissa deserved her special day and how weddings are once in a lifetime. My dad said they figured I'd understand because I was always so mature. I stared at them in disbelief. I asked them how I was supposed to pay for school now. My mom gave me this dismissive look and said, "Well, most people just take out loans. You'll be fine." That was the moment something inside me cracked. I don't think I even yelled. I just stood up, grabbed my backpack, and left. I stayed with a friend for a few days and then moved into a cheap basement apartment near campus. I picked up more hours at my part-time job. I applied for scholarships and grants and, yes, loans. It took me 6 years to finish my degree because I had to go part-time some semesters, but I did it. Without them. Without a cent from that fund. Melissa's wedding was beautiful, by the way. I went because I didn't want to cause drama, but I barely smiled in any photos. I felt like a ghost standing in the corner, watching my entire future get poured into champagne flutes and sparkler exits. No one even thanked me. Melissa didn't mention the fund once. She just kept saying how lucky she was to have such supportive parents. Fast forward 10 years. I'm 32 now, and I've built a good life for myself. I work in tech, project management at a solid mid-sized firm. I'm not a millionaire, but I'm stable. I own a small condo, drive a decent car, and my student loans are almost paid off. I haven't talked to Melissa in years. We grew apart, and honestly, I stopped trying. As for my parents, we stayed in occasional contact, birthdays, holidays, but it was never the same. Something broke back then and never got fixed. Then last month, I got a call out of the blue. It was my mom. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered. She asked how I was doing, how work was going, if I was dating anyone. I waited for the ask. It came 5 minutes later. "Craig, your father and I are in a bit of a situation. We're in some debt. Credit cards, mostly. It's gotten out of hand. We were wondering if you might be able to help us. Just a little. Just until we get back on our feet." I asked her how much. She said, "About 32,000. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't even a cruel laugh. It was just disbelief. I asked her why I should help them after what they did to me. She started crying. Told me I was their son. Told me I was doing so well, and Melissa's had some hard years and can't contribute much. She said they were desperate. I told her to ask Melissa. Then I hung up. They haven't stopped calling since. I didn't block their number. Not right away. I told myself I was just leaving the door open in case they came to their senses and apologized, or at the very least, admitted what they did was wrong. But I should have known better. My parents have always had this selective memory. They can remember what brand of cake Melissa liked for her 10th birthday, but somehow forgot spending my entire college fund on her wedding. So the calls kept coming. At first, it was just my mom. Her voice would come through my phone like a ghost from a life I'd outgrown. Soft, guilt-laced, always starting with, "Hey honey," like nothing had happened. The first few messages were emotional. She'd talk about the debt, about how the interest was piling up, about how hard it was to sleep at night. "We're drowning, Craig," she said in one voicemail. "And it just doesn't feel fair that you won't even talk to us." Fair. That word echoed in my brain for days. Like it had been fair to spend 40 grand of my inheritance without even asking me. Like it had been fair to tell me to just get loans, while Melissa got a horse-drawn carriage and a live jazz band. I ignored the messages. I kept my head down at work. But something inside me started to boil. Old anger, the kind I thought I'd buried after years of therapy and distance, began to surface again. I wasn't even mad about the money anymore, not really. I was mad that they still didn't see what they'd done. That they still felt entitled to ask me for help without ever owning up to how they'd let me down. Then the messages changed tone. My dad started calling too, which was unusual. He wasn't much of a talker when I was growing up, more the silent, newspaper and black coffee type. When he did speak, it was either an order or a sigh. But now he was leaving long voicemails, his voice tight and edged with frustration. "This isn't just about the money, Craig," he said in one. "This is about family. About loyalty. I don't know who put these ideas in your head, but you're not better than us." Not better than them. That one got under my skin. I never thought I was better than them. I just worked my butt off to build something they told me I'd have to fight for alone. And now that I had it, they wanted a cut. The kicker came 2 weeks later. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was sitting in my condo eating reheated Chinese food when I got a text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. You could have said no without being a selfish prick. No name. No context. But I knew the voice behind it. Melissa. I hadn't spoken to her in over 5 years. She didn't show up to my graduation, didn't reach out when I moved into my condo or when I got promoted last year. But now, suddenly, here she was, jumping into the fray like I owed her something too. I stared at the message for a full minute before typing back. Funny coming from someone who spent my college fund on peonies and centerpieces. 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. I could picture her typing furiously, backspacing, starting again. Finally, she replied. It wasn't your money. Mom and Dad said it was for the family, and I'm the one who actually needed it. That broke something in me. I didn't even respond. I just sat there, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily they came to her. How convinced she was that it was never mine to begin with. How little she valued what I'd sacrificed. The next morning, I got an email. It was from my dad. It wasn't long, but it was cold. Clinical. The subject line just said help. The body was 2 paragraphs about their debt, their payments, their dire circumstances. Attached was a PDF of their credit card balances. The final line read, "We expect some level of support from our son, who we raised and gave everything to." Everything. I stared at that word until my eyes blurred. Everything. They gave me everything. Except my college fund. Except a fair shot. Except the basic respect of treating me like my future mattered as much as Melissa's fantasy wedding. That week, I didn't answer any calls. I didn't open their texts. I didn't even tell my friends what was going on. I just went to work, came home, and stewed in silence. But underneath that silence, something was shifting. I started digging. I looked up old emails from my college financial aid office. I found the loan statements. I pulled receipts from my years of struggle, literal and figurative. The extra shifts at the bookstore. The ramen dinners. The internships that paid in experience. I created a folder on my desktop and named it Debt That Isn't Mine. Then I went further. I requested my grandparents' will from the county archive. I didn't even know if I could get a copy, but turns out I could. Took about 2 weeks. When it came, I scanned it line by line, my pulse pounding like a drum. And there it was, in black and white. $40,000 to be held in trust for our grandson, Craig, last name, to be used solely for the purpose of his college education. Solely. Not for the family. Not to be borrowed. Not to be spent on Melissa's white silk napkins and shrimp tower. For my education. I sat back in my chair and stared at that sentence. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I felt vindicated and furious all at once. They'd lied to me. Not just about the money, but about its origin, its intent, its very meaning. And now they were begging me for help while still pretending they'd done nothing wrong. The next time they called, I picked up. It was a Wednesday night. My mom's voice came through the line, brittle and breathless. "Craig? Oh, thank God. I've been trying to." I cut her off. Calmly, firmly. "I got a copy of the will." Silence. She didn't ask what will. She knew. "I know it was meant for me," I said. "I know what you did." She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed. This long, dramatic exhale like she was the victim. "Craig, we were just trying to hold the family together. Melissa was going through so much, and we thought we could pay it back later. But you didn't," I said. "And now you want me to." "It's been 10 years, she snapped. "You're successful now. Why are you still holding on to this?" I could have said 1,000 things. I could have listed every night I sat awake wondering how I'd afford next semester. Every job I took just to scrape by. Every loan statement I still check monthly. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Because you never once said you were sorry." That quieted her. I could hear my dad's voice in the background. Muffled, sharp. Then he got on the line. "Craig, this isn't productive. You're acting like a child." I nearly laughed. I was a child. When you took the money. Now I'm an adult. One who doesn't owe you a cent. They both started talking at once. Guilt. Shame. The family name. Pride. I listened for a moment, then calmly said, "You should have thought about that before you stole from me," and hung up. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt empty. But it didn't stop there. Because about a week later, I found out that my parents had told other relatives that I was abandoning them, that I'd gone cold and forgotten where I came from. I found out from my cousin Ella, who texted me asking why Aunt Linda had mentioned I refused to help my dying parents. Dying. They weren't dying. Struggling, sure, but that was on them. Still, the rumor mill had started. And Melissa? She was fueling it. Posting vague messages on Facebook about some people forgetting who loved them first and selfish siblings who throw away family like garbage. Screenshots of those posts started making their way to me. People I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly reaching out, most with concern, some with judgment. That was when I realized they weren't going to stop. Not just the calls, not just the messages, but the campaign, the manipulation, the pressure. They weren't just drowning in debt. They were dragging me under with them. And I had a decision to make. Because I could keep ignoring them, or I could start taking steps. Steps they wouldn't see coming. Steps that would finally force them to understand the weight of what they'd done. That's when the real plan started forming in my head. I didn't sleep the night I found out they'd told the extended family I was abandoning them. I stared at the ceiling of my bedroom, my condo, the one I bought with my own hands, my own money, my own credit history, and felt something deep inside me fracture. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about the college fund or the calls or the guilt trips. It was about identity, about betrayal, about the kind of quiet, psychological war that leaves invisible scars long before you even realize you've been bleeding. That week, I stopped responding to everyone. My phone stayed on silent. Social media, what little I still used, was dormant. I canceled lunch plans. I skipped the gym. I couldn't concentrate at work. Every time I opened an email or sat down for a meeting, I'd see their faces flash across my mind. Melissa's smug, dismissive texts. My dad's cold PDF. My mom's crying voicemails. I felt like I was back in that house at 19 again. The invisible son who never got the cake or the praise or the courtesy of fairness. I started drinking again. Not heavily, not spiraling, but enough that the late nights felt hazy and the mornings felt dry. I told myself it was just stress, just a phase, but I knew better. The part of me that had worked so hard to build this life, to escape the guilt, the favoritism, the manipulation, felt suddenly small and hollow. Like maybe all I'd built was just a thin shield, and now that they were pressing on it, the cracks were starting to show. The lowest point came on a Friday night, maybe 3 weeks after the last call. I was in the parking garage of my condo, sitting in my car with the engine off. It had been a long week. I'd snapped at a coworker that morning, flaked on dinner plans with a friend, and missed a call from my boss because I just couldn't bear to talk to another person. In that garage, in the dark, with nothing but the hum of distant traffic above me, I started crying. Not loud, not theatrical, just quiet, bitter tears. The kind you don't even realize are coming until they're already on your face. I remember gripping the steering wheel and whispering, "Why wasn't I ever enough?" That question haunted me for years. Through school, through work, through every holiday where Melissa got the best seat at the table and I got asked to be the photographer. Through every time I achieved something, an A+ paper, a new job, even my first bonus, and heard nothing but a lukewarm good for you over the phone. It was always Melissa who sparkled, who struggled, who deserved saving. And me? I was just fine, always expected to be okay. But something changed in that parking garage. I didn't have some grand epiphany. No cinematic swell of music. Just a quiet, tired realization that if I didn't pull myself out of this, if I let them win, even now, I'd be proving them right. I'd be the bitter, selfish, broken version of me they wanted to paint to the rest of the family. And I was so tired of letting their narrative define my worth. So I started rebuilding. Quietly. Intentionally. The first thing I did was open a blank document on my laptop and title it Truth File. I started writing. Not a story. Not a plan. Just the truth. Every moment I remembered. Every slight. Every cold word. Every time I was dismissed, overlooked, lied to, used. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering. Because trauma, I realized, has a funny way of making you question your memory. I wanted something I could hold up to myself and say, yes, this happened. You are not crazy. Next, I reconnected with the people who actually cared. My best friend, Mateo, had been trying to reach me for weeks. I finally called him back and told him everything. He listened, didn't judge, didn't interrupt. When I was done, he just said, "That's messed up, man. But you're not alone." It meant more than I expected. He invited me over for dinner with his wife and kids that weekend. We ate lasagna, watched old movies, laughed. I sat on the couch with his toddler asleep on my chest and felt something loosen in me. A knot I didn't even know was there. I didn't have to prove anything in that room. I didn't have to justify why I didn't want to bail out my parents. I was just Craig. A guy who'd been hurt, but who was still standing. At work, I started saying yes again, to coffee breaks, to brainstorming sessions, to leadership opportunities. My manager, Angela, called me into her office one afternoon and said, "You've been off lately. You okay?" I told her I was going through something personal, but that I was committed to bouncing back. She nodded, smiled, and said, "Well, you're still one of the most dependable people on this team. Let me know how I can support you." And just like that, I felt seen again. I picked up journaling. I rejoined the gym. I cut back on drinking. Small steps, but each one mattered. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just trying to find myself again, piece by piece. The self that existed before the guilt calls and the inheritance theft and the twisted family dynamic. One night, I opened that truth file again and read through it from top to bottom. Then I wrote one more line. This doesn't define me anymore. I don't know why, but writing that broke something open. Not in a bad way, in a freeing way. Like I'd finally acknowledged that yes, my past was painful, but it wasn't the whole story. I was more than the kid whose parents robbed him to buy peonies and a vintage Rolls-Royce rental. I was more than the younger brother left behind while the golden child shined. I was someone who had survived it. And now I was becoming someone stronger. The calls from my parents started to slow. I think, maybe, they realized I wasn't going to bend. Or maybe they were just too busy trying to juggle their creditors. Either way, the silence was a gift. But Melissa? She didn't go quietly. A month after my breakdown, she posted a picture of her and our parents on Facebook. It was an old photo, probably from her wedding. The caption read, "No matter what, we always stick together." Some people forget where they come from, but not us. It got over 100 likes. A few mutual family friends commented with things like, "Stay strong," and "Family first always." One even wrote, "Some people are too full of themselves to remember who fed them." That one stung. I knew it was about me. They were building a narrative, painting me as the villain, the ungrateful son, the arrogant success story who turned his back on the people who raised him. And it worked, because I got a text from my Aunt Teresa the next day asking if I was okay and saying she was disappointed to hear I'd abandoned my family. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just replied, "There's more to the story than you've been told." And that was true, because the real story wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of emotional labor, the unequal love, the unspoken expectations that I would always be the fallback plan while Melissa got the safety nets and second chances. But I wasn't a backup plan. Not anymore. That realization, that deep, unshakable belief that I no longer owed them anything, was the first real step toward healing, toward taking my power back. And once I had that, I started thinking about the future, about what comes next. Because the past, it may have shaped me, but it didn't own me. And soon, I'd make sure they understood that, in a way they'd never forget. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to be calm, methodical, controlled. Because the best revenge? It's not loud. It's earned. The morning I decided to act wasn't dramatic. It wasn't stormy or symbolic or soaked in adrenaline. It was calm, almost too calm. I woke up before my alarm, 6:13 a.m., to be exact, and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, blanketed in stillness. But inside, something had shifted. Not rage, not bitterness, just clarity. That kind of cold, focused clarity that comes when you've sat with something long enough to strip away the noise and just see the truth for what it is. I had nothing left to give them, not emotionally, not financially. But I had something else now, leverage. I had time, resources, and most importantly, the truth. And I was going to use it. The first thing I did was reach back out to the county archive where I got my grandparents' will. I asked them if it was possible to obtain copies of any correspondence or transactions related to the trust. They told me that because I had legal standing as the named beneficiary, I could submit a request for the trust disbursement records, basically a paper trail of what happened to the money after my grandparents passed. That process took 2 weeks. 2 slow, irritating weeks where I busied myself with work and projects and a very real effort to avoid overthinking. I reminded myself this wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. This was about accountability, about no longer playing the part of the quiet one in the family drama. When the envelope finally arrived, I opened it in my kitchen, standing barefoot on the cold tile floor, coffee forgotten beside me. Inside were 3 things. A notarized release form signed by my parents, authorizing the use of the $40,000 trust. A bank transfer record, dated roughly 8 months before Melissa's wedding. A brief handwritten letter from the estate attorney, confirming that the fund had been released in full for educational purposes, per the trustee's discretion, based solely on the signed statement from my parents that it would be used for my college tuition. Educational purposes. Except it wasn't. And they had signed that letter, both of them. I stared at their signatures for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt like looking at a crime scene. The neat, flowing loops of my mother's cursive. The rigid, slanted scrawl of my father's blocky letters. They hadn't just spent the money. They'd lied. On paper. To a lawyer. About a fund my grandparents created specifically for me. It was more than betrayal now. It was fraud. I placed the papers in a folder and filed it away in my desk drawer, beneath old tax returns and passport copies. I wasn't ready to use them yet, but I knew I would. The next step came naturally. I reached out to my cousin Ella, the only person in the family who had dared ask me directly what was going on after the rumors started flying. We met for coffee at a quiet little spot downtown. I hadn't seen her in person in a few years, but she greeted me with a tight hug and that same raised eyebrow she used to flash when our aunt started gossiping. "Okay," she said, sitting down across from me. "Tell me everything." So I did. I walked her through the timeline. The fund, the wedding, the silent years, the debt, the calls, the manipulation. Her eyes widened when I mentioned the will. Her jaw actually dropped when I showed her the scanned copy of the letter with my parents' signatures. "Craig, this is serious," she whispered. "I know. Like, legally serious. They committed fraud." I nodded. "And they're trying to paint me as the bad guy." She leaned back, folding her arms. "So what are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked her something I'd been wondering for weeks. Who else believes their version of the story? Ella hesitated. Honestly, a lot of them. Aunt Linda, Uncle Ron, even Grandma on Mom's side. They've all been talking about how cold you've gotten. Melissa's been laying it on thick. She posted some teary Instagram story last week about losing a sibling to greed. I shook my head slowly. "But," Ella added, leaning in, "not everyone buys it. And if they saw what you just showed me, the whole narrative falls apart." That was what I needed to hear. Because my revenge, I realized, wasn't going to be about screaming at my parents or exposing them online or dragging them through court. Though, if it came to that, I had the paperwork ready. No, my revenge was going to be slow. Precise. I wasn't going to destroy them. I was going to dismantle the pedestal they built for themselves. One polite, undeniable truth at a time. And the first domino? The family. That weekend, I organized a catch-up dinner with a few cousins and old family friends. Nothing too suspicious. Just a small gathering at a casual Italian place downtown. I told them I was in a better place mentally and wanted to reconnect. They came, 6 of them. All people who had heard something about me cutting off my parents, but none of them had heard my side. Until that night. I brought the folder. I brought the timeline. I brought my voice. The same quiet voice they'd always called mature, but rarely listened to. And I laid it all out. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. By the end of the meal, 2 cousins were visibly shaken. One offered to write a letter of support, just in case I ever needed it legally. Another hugged me so hard I nearly lost my breath and whispered, "I'm so sorry." I had no idea. Word spread fast after that. I didn't ask for it to, but it did. The same way rumors had spread against me, now the truth spread for me. It was like a ripple, one cousin to another, one message thread to the next. People started reaching out, not with judgment, but with apology, with questions, with sympathy. I received a message from my Aunt Sharon, someone who hadn't spoken to me in years, saying she wanted to talk. She said she'd seen the documents, that she believed me. I didn't reply, not yet, because I wasn't done. Next, I met with a lawyer, a real estate and inheritance attorney, recommended by a friend. I brought everything. The will, the letter, the bank transfer, the messages. I told him I wasn't interested in suing yet, but I wanted to know my options. He was blunt. Technically, this is trust fraud. The trustee, who I assume was your dad, used funds under false pretenses. There's a statute of limitations, but given the evidence and the ongoing impact, you could absolutely make a case. Would it hurt them? He tilted his head. Financially, yes. Reputationally, even more. And if you're asking whether they'd face jail time, unlikely, but not impossible, especially if the IRS gets involved. I left that meeting with more paperwork, more evidence, more power, but I still hadn't decided how far I was willing to go. Because this wasn't just about punishment. It was about justice, about healing. And sometimes, justice doesn't mean lawsuits. Sometimes, it just means the truth sees daylight. I waited. I watched. Then, 2 weeks later, Melissa posted a video. It was on her Instagram, public, of course. She sat on her couch in some softly lit room, wearing a hoodie and no makeup, the classic, I'm vulnerable look. She talked about family, about betrayal, about how some people let success turn them into strangers. How one of the hardest things in life is realizing your own sibling sees you as disposable. It had music in the background. Sad piano. The comments poured in. You don't deserve this. Some people forget who raised them. Stay strong, queen. I felt my stomach turn, but I didn't comment. I didn't text her. I just clicked download and saved the video to a folder labeled Manipulation Campaign. Because it was almost time, not to explode, but to execute, to make a move they never saw coming. The moment I executed the plan was so quiet, it almost felt anticlimactic. No fireworks, no slamming doors, just a single email, sent on a cloudy Wednesday afternoon from the quiet corner of a coffee shop. The subject line was simple: clarification regarding recent family allegations. And the recipient list? That's where the real punch was. 23 names. Every aunt. Every uncle, every cousin who texted me half concerned, half condemning messages over the past few months. The extended family Facebook group admin. Even Melissa's mother-in-law, who had shared that teary Instagram story Melissa made to her own circle of church friends, apparently, so they could all pray for reconciliation. I had debated for weeks whether to go this route, whether to respond at all. But after seeing Melissa double down on her public narrative, twisting the story to make me look like a cruel, selfish son who abandoned his poor, aging parents, I knew silence wasn't strength anymore. It was surrender, and I wasn't surrendering to them ever again. The email was 3 pages long. Page 1, the timeline. Dates, facts, calm language. No editorializing. Just this happened, then this, then this. I even included receipts, attached scanned copies of the original trust documents, the signed letter from the estate attorney, and the bank records showing the withdrawal marked for educational disbursement. Page 2, my story. Not angry, not accusatory, just honest. I explained what the money meant to me, how I'd found out it was gone, what I went through to finish school on my own. I talked about the ramen, the late nights, the rejected financial aid appeals. I didn't paint myself as a victim. I painted myself as someone who survived despite their choices. Page 3, the manipulation. I included screenshots of Melissa's vague posting social media campaigns, her text calling me a selfish prick, the voicemail my dad left calling me a disgrace to the family. I even included a quote from my mother's voice message about how it's been 10 years and you should be over it by now. I ended the email with this paragraph. I'm not sending this to shame anyone. I'm sending it because the version of the story being circulated is not only false, it's dangerous. I've spent years being silent, assuming the truth would speak for itself. But it didn't. And now, I'm speaking for myself. If you choose to believe their version, that's your right. But you'll be doing it in full knowledge of the truth, not the fairy tale. Then I hit send. I stared at the message sent confirmation for a long time. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I felt centered, like I had just finally pushed the last brick back into place after a long, crumbling collapse. I didn't hear anything for a day. Then the replies started. Some were immediate. One from my Aunt Lila, Craig. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Another from my cousin Nathan. This changes everything. I feel awful for ever doubting you. A third, more biting. I always knew something was off about how Melissa talked about it. Thank you for being brave enough to show the truth. And then, 2 days later, I got the call. It was from my dad. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, voice tight and furious. You had no right to air family business like that. We were trying to protect Melissa, and you humiliated us. I saved the message. Didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another call. This time my mom. Craig, please, she said through a tear-choked whisper. You don't know what you've done. People are calling us, judging us. Your father can't sleep. Melissa hasn't left the house. Is that what you wanted? I didn't answer that one either. Because the truth is, It wasn't what I wanted. It was what they earned. Still, I wasn't done. I reached back out to the estate attorney, the one who had handled my grandparents' will. I explained the situation, asked what options were on the table, given the forged intent and false use of the funds. I made it clear I wasn't interested in criminal charges, but I wanted a legal acknowledgement on record that the trust had been violated. He took it seriously. Turns out, even if the money was long gone, the paper trail was fresh enough. And because the trust was designated solely for educational use under a formal agreement, the misuse, especially when proven through false statements, qualified as breach of fiduciary duty. That's when I made my move. I had the lawyer draft a formal letter, one that included the documentation, the will, and the bank statements. It was addressed directly to my parents, certified and signed, and it said, in careful, lawyerly language, that I now had full legal evidence of misappropriation of trust assets and that I reserved the right to pursue civil penalties or restitution in court. I didn't threaten to sue them. I didn't need to. The implication was enough. They went silent for 2 weeks. I found out later, through Ella, that they'd canceled a vacation they'd been planning and had started quietly talking to a financial advisor about selling their SUV. Melissa, apparently, unplugged from social media and had a full-on breakdown when she realized how many people had turned on her. But what really stunned me was the letter I received in the mail from my dad. Handwritten. 3 pages. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it danced around the edges of one. He talked about doing what they thought was right at the time, about how hard it had been to say no to Melissa's dreams, about how he and my mom never thought it would come back like this. He said they were ashamed of how they handled things, that they didn't realize how deep the damage went. The final paragraph? We never saw you hurting. We saw you as the strong one. Maybe that was our mistake. Maybe that's why we leaned on you. But I see now that strength doesn't mean someone isn't breaking underneath. I don't expect forgiveness, just understanding. I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. I just folded the letter neatly and placed it in the folder with everything else. Then I closed the folder for the last time. Melissa hasn't reached out since. Not a text. Not a comment. Nothing. I hear she's keeping her head down. Maybe even going to therapy. That part doesn't matter to me anymore. What matters is this. The story is mine again, not theirs. I'm no longer the quiet one. I'm no longer the backup plan. I'm no longer the emergency fund in human form. I'm just Craig, 32, debt-free, free in more ways than I've ever been. And for the first time in my life, when I think about my future, there's no bitterness in it. No weight dragging me backward. Just possibility. Just peace. And that's the real inheritance I gave myself.